good. So I'd like to welcome everybody again to another episode of the Powerlunch. Today we have actually what I'm anticipating to be a really cool show. We have Keith Townsend with us. Keith Townsend is what I would say a national level talent. How's that, Keith?
Oh, that's a good one.
No, I've actually been looking forward to this one for a while. Keith Townsend is out on Twitter. I follow him closely. His Twitter handle is the CTO Advisor. He talks about a lot of really interesting technology topics. He throws out some intriguing questions, things for us all to think about in a technology community. But it's one of the Twitter feeds that I follow religiously. But he's also done this kind of a recent thing that is interesting for us to talk about that has to do with hybrid infrastructure. So that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. Is Keith's going to give us an overview of the hybrid infrastructure, why he did it, what he did, the details around that. But then I'm also going to throw him a little bit of a curveball. And I'm going to ask him, Keith, would you talk a little bit about the CTO Roadshow? Because I think that the CTO Roadshow is a cool idea. I thought it was a great idea from the beginning. He owns a camper and an F-250, and I own a camper and an F-350, so I feel connected on the camper level. But I think the CTO Roadshow is really a cool idea, so maybe we can get a little bit of that after we talk about the hybrid infrastructure and why you did that, and et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to you, Keith. Maybe give a little bit of who you are, the CTO Advisor, and kind of, maybe why you started the CTO Advisor. What got you to do that? Because, like I said, I don't know how the period that I've been following you is measured in years. So,
it kind of gets lost in the blur, right?
yeah, it kind of turns into a blur. But I've been following you for a long time. Just kind of interested in what you're doing, what you have to say, and the tech that you talk about. Really interesting. So maybe talk just a little bit on CTO Advisor.
I don't like slides, but I did prepare a couple just so for people who are watching this on replay, they can hit the pause button if they want to read through the whole bio. But I have a short bio that people can take a look at and talk through kind of this point of reference. The CTO Advisor, I have 20 plus years. I'm at the point where we stopped counting how many years in IT experience. I've started out help desk, worked my way up, went back to school, got my degree, worked my way up into enterprise architect type roles in the IT space, moved over to becoming a management consultant at PwC, got burnt out from doing management consulting, went back to being an enterprise architect, discovered that I'm no longer the big knobs and buttons guy anymore. And I can't keep up with the super smart people and the tech side of the house. So I started my own company, the CTO Advisor, in which we create, our primary business actually is creating content and having that content sponsored by some of our major vendor friends in the world, and me having this whole spiel of me asking tough questions, similar to Keith, how you're going to do with me on this in this environment. Ask tough questions about why do they build what they're doing, why should customers pay attention to any of it, and why should customers just not go to the public cloud instead. So that's the CTO Advisor in a nutshell.
Awesome. Very good. And like I said, I mean, I've been following you on Twitter. It's a very interesting Twitter feed. You ask and answer some great questions. So I would encourage anybody who's on this call to check out at CTO Advisor, get on the feed at Twitter, and then you can get updates from Keith. And not only is it interesting because you talk about the tech, but you kind of peel back the curtain a little bit and let people see behind the scenes, see what's going on, a little bit of family stuff mixed in there. So it's actually it's one of the, in today's world of wanting to kind of stab yourself in the face with a pencil from listening to what's going on the Twitter, it's kind of a breath of fresh air to just go out and get information. So I do enjoy your Twitter feed, so compliments to you for that. So let's get on to the hybrid infrastructure thing. So what was the genesis of that? Where did you kind of come up with that? What made you get interested in this? I'm gonna just say air quotes project.
So I love. I'm not a big slides guy, but I love pictures to kind of express expressions. And this was the picture. This is one of the pictures that I like to share about, like, how do you hybrid IT? We hear I mean, Keith, you're a CTO, so you hear the term all the time. Hybrid IT, you have to mix public and private cloud resources. And then as an engineer, you start thinking about stuff like, wait, hold on. I have AWS Lambda, which is serverless. I have my firewall at the edge of my private data center. Then I have my Oracle database at the end of it. I need to create a security rule that says that a Lambda process cannot have access to certain tables or certain servers or some security rule that I would have originally applied with network security rules in my data center. But now I need some higher level abstraction to do that, as some higher level security policy. How does that even work? Like, what do I do? Where do I start? Like, should I even be doing this? And that was those practical questions kind of drove me to say, there's plenty of people saying we should have a hybrid infrastructure, but no one's actually showing us how to have that hybrid infrastructure. Why don't I just build a data center? Kind of stuck in a time period of when we were all doing hybrid vSAN with hard drives and flash, and then with vSAN, and then migrate that to what everyone is talking about. Why don't we just tell the story? Why don't we live it and then tell the story?
One of the things that I run into a lot is that there's a concept out there that it's like all or nothing, right? And that's one of the things that I like about the concept of hybrid, and that is that it's applying relevant technical solutions to solve business challenges, and it's not doing cloud for the sake of the cloud. It's really thinking about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Is that part of what you ran into or you've encountered, is people were kind of wrong-minded in their approach to, and I'm air quotes wrong-minded in their approach to the way they thought about the cloud, and the concept of everything needs to be cloud or nothing needs to be the cloud, but really the answer is someplace in the middle?
Yeah, so I've come from this world. My last full-time enterprise IT job as an enterprise architect, we were doing drug discovery. So we had when I went to go talk to the lead scientist working on curing Alzheimer's, and I'd say, you know what, Mr. Super smart scientist, what do you need to do your job better from IT? How can I service you better? He took some time, thought about it, and said, you know what, Keith, give me a faster connection to AWS. Perfectly made sense for what the type of work that he did. My other hat was supporting SAP. So I would go to the CFO and say, you know what, do we need to move the SAP HANA and all of this, the goodness that it brings? The CFO said, you know what, we just went through a massive SAP migration going on a centralized database. I can't disrupt the business yet again. Let's look at this in another 5 years. So that meant staying another 5 years on HP UX. So I had two extremely divergent clients. One that was cloud native, pushing the envelope, trying to do as much stuff as possible in the cloud, and another one using the legacy OS that's supposed to be retired in the next couple of years. So that's the reality of it. We have these folks out saying, you know what, go replatform, replatform, replatform. Whereas the truth of the matter is most businesses are like, you know what, if I replatform this app, what do I get in return versus the risk of replatforming? And they're realizing They don't need to. What we need is an environment in which IT can do both the stuff that kept the lights on and pays the bills, and the new innovation.
Right.
I have a question.
Right. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I have a question, and forgive my ignorance on the topic. But to me, hybrid would say I've got a local data center, and then I've got data center in the cloud somewhere, whether that be a public cloud or a private cloud, something to that nature. Is that inaccurate?
So that was, I think, that would have been a snapshot in time a couple of years ago. I think
Okay.
we've moved to, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on in this conversation, where hybrid is a model versus a set of locations. If VMware has disrupted this whole concept of hybrid with VMware Cloud on insert your cloud provider here. So I'm taking what I do on premises and doing the exact same thing, but in AWS using the exact same tools that I've always used. So it's a operating model for how I run IT infrastructure. Let's go back to my SAP example. And this is a great question, Kenneth. If my team has built the past 15 years of standard operating system, standard operating procedures around making the most critical application in my business work, and I don't need what the public cloud provides for me as far as programmable interfaces, but more importantly, elastic infrastructure. I don't need that, but I want to get out of the managing physical hardware business. When I look at what it takes to run SAP in the public cloud versus what it takes to run it on-prem, we're talking about 2 to 3 times more money. And my team has to learn a new set of skills. If I take VMware Cloud on AWS, put it in there, same skill set, same financial model with the exception of just renting the underlying infrastructure. So when we talk about hybrid, is that ability to do what you do operationally and technology-wise, whether that's on-prem, in a colo, in a public cloud, and combine that with public cloud.
It's an interesting new kind of a way to think about things. It's listen to you articulate that is very, very interesting. So maybe can we talk a little bit about the hybrid infrastructure project and what you did with that? Kind of get into a little bit of the tech you have in place and talk about maybe some of the physical layer of what you got going on with that.
Yeah, so let's grab another picture. This is where pictures do come in handy. Share. So the cartoon architecture picture of it. So basically I have a cage, and I'll show you the picture of the cage shortly, in the QTS data center in Chicago. We have a 10 gigabit port to Megaport. This really, really cool thing where it's basically a virtual port. It's a physical fiber connection to Megaport to Megaport's network. And then I can point that connection to any one of the cloud providers. So I can get a direct connect to AWS, anywhere from a gig up to 10 gig. Same thing for Oracle Cloud, etc. As I need to connect to the public clouds, I can connect to the public clouds in any way that I can. I wish I would have put a different slide in here, but I have a slide of the vSAN or the network setup. So basically, on the left hand, my data center engineer, on the right, on that picture in the right, my data center engineer is installing what's on the right. But on the left, we have a Dell 730XD pod. So this has a bunch of spinning rough drives, some flash, about 128 gig of MEM each, and dual procs. The type of virtualization pod you have built 4 or 5 years ago. Based off of Intel Broadware processors, we have a 40net firewall, we have Arista 10 gig networking. So if you were designing or deploying a VMware pod, this would be probably what you deploy that's on the right-hand side of this picture. I'm sorry, on the left-hand side of this picture, this is probably what you would deploy. We're doing a project with HPE in which we're showing their DHCI. We ran into a bunch of practical problems with the picture on the left because we're talking about modernizing the data center. And operationally, if we want to get into that, we ran into a lot of problems that we expected to run in, but I'm actually living and I'm kind of regretting because I'm like, oh, I have all of these production issues that I hate, but that is the design of the project. I need to feel the pain that customers feel so that as I'm telling the story, I have a point of reference so customers understand that, really understand what they go through.
So when you talk about, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Keith Townsend. I see that you left off Azure on that list. Is that by design, or they actually do not? Megaport doesn't support Azure.
So Megaport does, I want to correct that. Megaport does support Azure. The reason why we left them off the list, because that's the slide from my Oracle sponsored study of all of the VMware Cloud solutions. So we brought all of the VMware Cloud solutions into the data center. And I think this is a great slide to look at this from. So if you think about that concept that Kenneth asked about, which is where is the hybrid cloud or hybrid infrastructure? We put this notion to test. VMware has said that if we implement VMware vSphere in the public clouds, then we can enjoy the same operating experience in the public clouds as we do on-prem, and VMware kind of normalizes that across all public clouds. When we did the study, Azure did not have a publicly available solution. So they had a solution, but Google had bought that company, and then they kind of retreated from their process. So they were still developing their solution. So this picture is from our study of all of the VMware Cloud solutions. But if you want to get a 10 gig connection to Azure via Megaport, or an insert provider here, because Megaport isn't the only one that does it. Equinix does it. AT&T, I think, has a service, but Equinix and Megaport both focus on this colo space. So if you want to go into a colo and get a connection to the public cloud, kind of Megaport and Equinix are the default solutions.
So, well, I guess we did kind of talk about the value proposition. I mean, I'm interested in kind of, as you think about, you have it set up in a data center in Chicago, and you're working through this. Like, are you doing any kind of specific testing with it, or how are you getting your metrics? How are you kind of documenting and thinking about the performance and those types of things, or are you running processes or running some kind of infrastructure for other businesses? So how are you actually kind of getting information on how it performs and how it works?
So that's a very good question. So we gave this a lot of thought at the onset. Performance is one of those things it's a snapshot in time then there's plenty of companies like Storage Review, et cetera, that does pure performance. If I got an all flash Nimble or all flash 3PAR or a VX block, if I got that into the data center, how much better is that over the previous solution? We don't do that. Our focus is at that integration point, which is to say, and the Oracle sponsored report is a great example of this. We, as architects or enterprise architects, yes, we care about performance in the macro perspective, or even in the micro perspective. Like, okay, I need to add 8 spindles or 8 drives to the storage array to eke out a little bit more performance. But as we talk about hybrid, we can kind of do that with clicks of a button in public clouds. If the thing isn't fast enough, we can click a couple of buttons and ask for more in the public cloud. So that's not the value that we bring. The value that we bring is the validation of operationally and from an architecture perspective, does this picture, like we've seen this picture before in some presentation by a colo or a cloud provider, we've seen this picture. How, going back to that first picture of, the kid kind of throwing up his arms like hybrid IT, yeah, sure. I see the picture, but what does that mean from a configuration perspective? Like, how do I make this work?
Right.
And that's what we focus on, is how do you make this work?
Yeah, like how do you decide which, I'm just going to say, apps or business apps or processes, how do you decide what makes sense to be part of a hybrid infrastructure architecture versus what makes sense to be local? How do you determine what tells a relevant story in
Yeah,
that
and
regard?
then how do you use it from a practical sense? So
Yeah, exactly.
a great example is the use case that we built the VMware Cloud Study around was VDI, because we did it at the onset of when everyone was trying to figure out, I need to go from 1,000 VDI instances to 10,000 VDI instances. Like, we literally had people there was examples of people taking their PCs off their desk and bringing it home because companies weren't prepared for the remote workforce. All of us who work in data centers, we comprehend the same thing. If I have VDI infrastructure designed for 1,000 people, to get 10x that, okay, we'll have it done for you in 8 months. I mean, that we got to procure stuff. We have to buy licenses. We got to install software. We got to order circuits. In order to do that from a practical perspective, we need more than what we have today. So what we said was, if you have a VDI infrastructure today built on VMware vSphere, and whether it's Citrix or Horizon, you just need more of what you already have. Isn't that what VMC on AWS, Oracle Cloud Solution, Google's VMware Solution, Azure's VMware Solution, isn't that what that's for? Shouldn't I just have to vMotion my VDI stuff into the public cloud and just ask for more vSphere hosts? Shouldn't it be that simple? That's what we put to the test. Mm-hmm. Is it that simple? What's the nuanced difference between each cloud provider, and what did that mean for our on-premises operations? Was the VMware story a real story?
Right. The problem is having to ask questions while I'm thinking about stuff at the same time. That's
interviewing is tough, man.
That's a problem. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's a lot to go. It's a lot.
There's a lot going.
Places to go.
There's a lot going on. So I guess one of my other questions is, and are you producing, like, are you documenting your process or documenting, let's say, your results through just the CTO Advisor site, or are you producing some kind of other content that talks about what you're seeing for results? And it's because it sounds like, well, and the thing is like, it's not just one thing, right? You're not just like going, here's what it is, bang, that's it. You're doing a lot of different stuff. So how are you talking about that other than the CTO Advisor? Because I'm on CTO Advisor, but are you publishing that anywhere? Or
we published. So we did, for the Oracle report, we did a couple of things. We published a couple of videos with me talking about the whole 10 gig stuff. That's one of my more popular or organic YouTube videos. People really are interested in how much does a 10 gig connection to the public cloud cost? What's the process to get it? That's a YouTube video. But the more formal stuff around the Oracle project, we published a report. So when you go to the CTO Advisor's website, and one of the headlines is a link to that detailed report with all of the results of each cloud provider. The other thing that we did for this report is we teamed with the Build Day Live, the B. Brown Bag Build Day Live team. So I talk at a very abstracted level still. So even for some people on this phone, the detail that we've gone into isn't enough detail. They want to actually see the button clicks. So the Build Day Live team did a Build Day Live. They actually showed the process of doing a vMotion from the private data center into VMware Cloud to one of the clouds. I don't know if it was, because once you do it in one of the clouds, it's all that part is all the same, but people want to see it. So the Build Day Live team on their site published a set of videos around doing exactly that.
Hey, could we pop the slide down so we're grabbing the video when we're talking a little bit? Cool. Thank you very much. All right. And actually, kind of a funny side note there. I didn't realize you actually had a CTO Advisor website. I've been following Twitter for so long. I didn't actually think about going out there to the site for content. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, if you go to thectoadvisor.com/projects, like everything we've done in the data center in the past. So the data center's been live and getting sponsors for the past a little bit less than a year now. And all of our projects that we've done so far or in progress are there at the under the CTOadvisor.com/project.
So out of curiosity, do you have vendors coming to you saying, hey, let's just say Pure Storage says, hey, can you run our thing through your data center and get some, give us your opinion, give us a report on what you think as far as performance? Is that kind of what's going on? Or
So a lot of so that, and I think that's one of my challenges have been people like to sell speeds and fees. I'm not particularly interested in speeds and in fees. I'm interested in operations. So selling that concept to some vendors have been challenging. So storage vendors is a great example of that. Storage vendors want to show that their flash built on the same underlying flash technology is faster than somebody else's flash built on the same underlying flash technology. And we're all going to keep the same flash in our data center for the next 10 years. So, that becomes the problem. The smarter or more forward-looking, because it's not necessarily smarter, the more forward-looking enterprise architects know that when I buy a storage array, this is a snapshot of time of what's best for today. But in 5 years and 10 years, when this storage array is still in production, it still needs to do the things from a operations perspective I need it to do. And
there's bedrock level stuff it needs to do, and then I'm sure you find there's like secret sauce and the software that surrounds the function, but there's this core of functionality that needs to exist.
Yeah. So the question is, I haven't ran into many people who've bought a modern storage array and said, you know what, this thing just does not perform very well. I should have bought the Nutanix version, or I should have bought the VMware version, or that performance is fine. Performance isn't the problem.
Right. It's interesting because I remember the days of this spin and disk and mechanical and SSDs coming online and getting speed. Now everything you buy is faster than anything we could conceive of.
We get into this. A great one is, so Intel is the big sponsor of the data center. They are the ones who wrote the check 3 months after I built the data center to kind of satisfy my creditors. And they have this move, store, process theme that they run at Intel. And what we're basically saying is we're putting that to test. So Intel is getting challenged by AMD. I think I just looked at a thing that Intel's data center share shrunk by 1.8% and AMD's grew by 1.8%. So AMD is directly eating into Intel's data center market share. But Intel has this really interesting story that says that it's not just about the processor. They have Optane storage story. They have a Ethernet 800 series story, and then they have the processor story, and then they have a security story and some crypto stuff. But the question is that real? Like, do we as enterprise architects and data center managers, do we care? Do we truly care about the big picture and the integration of all of this stuff together across the private data center and the hybrid cloud, or private operations and hybrid cloud? Or is it just about who has the most cores at the fastest speed and can have the most memory?
Well, so I have a question for you, and it's not off topic, but it's So here's the thing. My history is in call centers. I remember the old days when they had, PBXs were the side of the refrigerator, all those things, right? And the big thing at the time was computer telephony integration,
Right.
voices, data, and CTI was a big deal. And then so CTI came down the road, game changer. But everything's kind of the same since then, right? When we first started packetizing voice, voices, data, everything's kind of the same, and it's just software wrappers around it. That was a disruptive technology. Do you see anything in today's space that might be a disruptive technology? Do you see anything? I mean, because like I said, I'm an old dog. I got white hair in my beard. I look at call centers. I look at some of this technology, and it's different wrappers around the same core.
Yeah.
One of the
So
things I'm interested in is what's the next disruptive technology that's going to come down the road that's kind of cool for us to start playing with.
So I don't know if I would say it's cool enough for the masses to play with, but it is disruptive because people, the vendors are honestly doing the yeoman's work and making it usable. And that is, I don't want to call it Kubernetes because Kubernetes is way more than what it is that vendors are doing. But this concept of normalizing underlay to the point that we can talk to it in a consistent API across the board. When I go to provision and we found this in our VMware study. When I go to provision, like when I go to provision of VM and VMware, that's the same whether I'm doing it on-prem or in the public cloud. What's not the same is when I need to expose a public IP address to it. So if I need to put if I move my VDI portal to the public cloud and it had a public IP address in my private data center and now it needs to have a public IP in the public cloud, you can do that a couple of different ways on each one of the cloud providers, and none of it is the same across any of the public cloud providers. So that becomes the nuance when we talk about hybrid cloud. Yes, it has VMware vSphere, but anytime it needs to touch physical infrastructure or logical infrastructure, that thing is different. Everyone is kind of coalescing that the Kubernetes API is the same. So, you have your telephony and call center routes, and that, when we have SS7, I think it's called the signaling protocol.
Signaling 7, yep.
Yeah,
The big heavy iron.
Yeah, when we have these concepts of ring tip, and we just encapsulate all of that into, and I'm showing my age by saying, and we encapsulate that stuff into IP. The advantage is that we build it on standards, and the iPhone is possible, or the iPhone is possible, and I can still pick up a dial tone phone and use a phone, and the two can communicate well. The underlying protocols happen. Kubernetes is becoming that thing that if I want to provision a public IP address, and we're still a few years away from it, but if I want to provision a public IP address for a thing, and this is the second thing, Kubernetes abstracts away, and VMware is fully embracing this. Kubernetes is the implementation of namespaces for everything. So whether your process is living on a VM, or if it's living in a container, or if it's living in a serverless thing, if I want to assign a security rule to it or IP address, I can name the thing and say I want the thing, and everything and all the minutia that needs to happen in the background, that wrapper stuff, all of that is automated versus processes I don't see. So I think I'm comfortable enough to say, like, Kubernetes itself, like clusters and pods and blah, I don't care. I don't care about any of that stuff at all. What I do care about is APIs.
Interesting, really interesting.
Ken had another question.
Oh, did you have a question, Ken?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
A question, a statement, a thought. But when you talk about what's the next disruptive technology, sometimes I'm looking at the Starlink, the whole Elon Musk satellite system, and in talking about cloud technology now, that's going to open up that kind of technology to people that don't even have internet access anymore. So how will that in the long term, you can put offices or warehouses or manufacturing in places that just had no capability of being.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. I've signed up for Starlink. I haven't gotten my equipment yet, but
So
yeah.
So have I.
Well, we're both RVers, and we'll get into that.
Yeah.
So as soon as we can get on that list. So I had this conversation actually with Cisco in another channel, as and we'll get into the RV thing. But as I'm looking at the map, and I'm going from Austin, Texas to LA, and I look at the massive Indian reservation that's in between the area, the sets of massive Indian reservations, and the lack of connectivity and the number. And I have this thing that I've been saying as a kid, geniuses are born everywhere in the world. They may not have the luxuries and the connectivity that we all have. So Ken, you're absolutely right that Starlink will be an affordable version of Starlink will be key to creating services. When they first started pushing gigabit to the home, I had these massive theories about how could the gigabit to the home be leveraged to create distributed cloud and a bunch of everything else. And I'm just not smart enough to predict what these smart people are going to do when we put these technologies in their hands. So that's a pretty good call out.
we actually have a customer who's in a beta program with Starlink, so it's kind of interesting seeing how it works and that it works. I think Raj had a question. I think I see a hand up there. Maybe Raj. Maybe not.
Nope.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Oh, maybe it was just my cursor. Sorry. Well, with that said, Keith, let's talk a little bit with the time we have left. Talk about CTO Roadshow. It's something I thought was a great idea. It's extremely intrigued by it. I think it's kind of cool, but maybe tell people who don't know what it is, just what it is and what you're doing with it.
So it came out of two desires, a personal desire and a business need. We made a good portion of our money, maybe 40% of our revenue came from conferences. So us showing up with a couple of cameras, some lights, etc., going to VMworld, ordering, renting a suite, hosting executives, and having a combination of I don't know if I've had. I'm almost certain I've had Paul on the CTO dose. I know I've had Paul on the CTO dose. So doing stuff editorially with like Paul, and then having stuff sponsored by vendors. So when conferences dried up, we were like, okay, we have a 40% gap in revenue. We have to feel this. We did it temporarily by hosting a virtual conference last year. It was really cool. The USA Today wrote it up. I'm just some schmuck from Chicago, and USA Today, featuring my little tiny conference as the future of tech conferences or conferences in general. I just didn't like the experience. I like seeing Keith, I like seeing Paul, I like seeing people in person. I like physical interaction. There's something about interviewing someone in person that you can't replicate. So we had been thinking about how we could recreate that without putting people at too much risk. And we said, okay, why don't we just go to the people? So that's the second thing, is I miss seeing people. There's this thing that me and my wife had toyed with for years, which was, to rent an RV and just do a nationwide trip. So I said, you know what, why don't we just rent an RV? Why don't we just rent a Class C and go around the country? And then we did the math of what it takes to rent a Class C and go around the country and said we might as well buy a Class C. Got into it, and then you find folks on Twitter convinced me that I should buy an F-250, or a truck and a trailer. And then as we got to like really examining this thing, and this is going into like the opening the Como of the business, like people really really like Airstreams.
Mhm.
And it's important to note this because Airstreams are like 3 or 4 times the price of a comparable trailer. So it was actually the missus and my business partner Melissa that pushed it. So we're gonna hit the road in our F-250 pulling the Airstream and hit 15 cities in 90 days, basically circling the nation.
That's a great idea, man. I love that. Well, and if you get bored, there is an Airstreams only park in St. Cloud, Minnesota. So if you need to come into God's country.
I will not get bored. There's a couple of things. Not only is there's an Airstream only one, there's a place in Colorado that you can rent an Airstream that's statically there, that's permanently camped.
Oh, wow.
So they have just a row of Airstreams that if you just want to get the experience of camping in
Airbnb of Airstream.
the Airbnb of Airstreams. I'm like, that's actually really cool. Before I bought one, I would have, if I'd known about it before I bought one, I would have rented one just to see like, okay, is this really worth?
So are you doing a CTO Advisor tour jersey to put up on your website, just like you're one of those arena rock bands?
Everybody's asked for that, like
tour dates on the back and stuff.
Yes, like I'm not a big rock culture guy, so tour t-shirts has never been my thing. Like I've gone to plenty of concerts, but tour t-shirts has never been the thing. And I'm learning, just my own edification is that I'm being opened up to a whole new world that's wonderful. And the tour t-shirt has to happen because people have asked for it. Nice. Constantly.
I'm guessing you're a retro video game guy though.
I am a retro video game guy. I don't have the dexterity for it's too many buttons for
There's too many buttons, man.
Too many buttons, man. I can't get all the buttons. Well, I bought it. I have a PlayStation 4 and I haven't used it since in almost 2 years. So